let's go right ahead and talk about the Final Four matchups. And Carrito in the chat, he says, I was not talking about you. You're a very classy guy. I like you for that. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. And so, I mean, like, I always feel like talking, for lack of a better term, talking trash about NBA players, I feel like it's very hypocritical because they're doing things on the basketball court that we only dream of doing. Like average people like us, they're doing things that we cannot do no matter how hard we try. And I feel like just discrediting that is disrespectful, it's disrespectful just to the players, and it's like everything that they've been through and everything that it took them to sort of get to the point where they're at. And like, again, it's disrespectful because it's like, I mean, who knows what I would have done if I was in their shoes. And it's a lot of pressure being an NBA player, and it's a lot of pressure being a basketball player in college as well. So I feel like talking down on some of these players is just disrespectful. Unless it's Ben Simmons. He deserves every single inch of... That's just me. But you guys know why I don't like Ben Simmons. His frame, his height, everything about him, it just screams basketball player, and he doesn't want to play, and I don't understand why. But that's a little bit of he has more to say in the chat. Plus, most fans use hindsight, and hindsight is always 20/20. That's also very true, because it's like people they usually look at the now, and they don't look at everything as a whole. And again, it's like, it's really disrespectful, especially like if the player ends up losing. Like, fans expect these guys to be perfect, and nobody is perfect. No matter how hard they try, no matter how hard they want to be, nobody is perfect. Unless you're like a LeBron fan and you think LeBron James is perfect. But I'm not one of those fans. But regardless, let's go into the matchups going into the Final Four. For the men's, they're happening tomorrow. For the women's, they're happening tonight. So, you know what? Why not? Let's do the women's first. So, ladies first, right? So, tonight, South Carolina is expected to go up against North Carolina in the Final Four. South Carolina has yet to lose a game this season, and I expect that trend to sort of continue going into this matchup. I don't see South Carolina losing to North Carolina. I think that South Carolina's roster and their star power is good enough to make it really far and to make it all the way to the finals. So I do not see South Carolina losing this game. And like, it's, again, this roster, they've been flawless in the regular season for 2 straight years. And that doesn't happen on accident. They didn't end up winning the championship last year, but that's all right. Like, I mean, no one is perfect. And I feel like that loss has it gave that team a drive to want to prove everybody wrong, because they already stunned the world being 36-0, and that brings a lot of pressure. Doing it again, it brings a lot of less pressure, because it's like, you've done this already and you've done this before. Now the real pressure comes into winning, and I feel like they're much more motivated to win now than they were last year. And I think that's going to play a part in this matchup. Now, in the next matchup, Iowa is going up against UConn, and this is probably going to be one of the most watched women basketball games in history. And Iowa going up against LSU in the Elite Eight, that was the most watched women's college game ever. And it destroyed, I'm just pulling up the stats right now just to see like the exact numbers of like that game and the exact viewership of that game. So for reference, LSU going up against Iowa, it outdrew every single NBA game in the last season except for Game 5 of the finals, every college football game last season outside of college football, Ohio State going up against Michigan, and the SEC championship, and every MLB game last season. So it was able to draw in more attention than all of these really big and highly anticipated men's sports games. And being able to do that is astonishing for women's basketball. And I think it's great for not just women's basketball, but for women's sports in general, because this is bringing much more awareness to all of these women athletes, because it's like, oh, these women athletes, they're tough too. So let's watch the women play this sport. Let's watch the women play that sport, this, that, and the other. I think this is great for women's sports in general, and it's definitely a long time coming. So back to the matchup in of itself. Iowa going up against UConn. I think that this is where Iowa's road ends. I think UConn has a better team as a whole overall and is better coached than Iowa, because when I look at Iowa, it's usually dependent on Caitlin and how well she can lead her offense. And obviously, like defenses, they have a really difficult time stopping her, so how could you blame them? But with UConn's side, they also have a really dominant player in Paige Buchers, but on top of having Buchers, they also have a better team as a whole. So I think the scoring between Buchers and Caitlin Clark is going to cancel out, and the matchup is ultimately going to be determined by which player coming either off the bench or in the starting five is going to make that difference. And I feel like UConn has a better chance of having players that are able to make that difference and are able to outduel Caitlin. Then again, this is Caitlin Clark we're talking about, so there's a possibility that she just says, you know what, forget the odds, I'm going to shoot every three in your face, and there's nothing you can do about it. Because that's just the player that she is, and that's just how dominant she is in the game. And wouldn't be surprised if Caitlin just shoots, and everything goes in. Just because that's just the player that she is. So that's the women's side. Now we're going to go talk about the men's side. I mentioned previously, like in a previous podcast, that this was the first time that in NCAA basketball history that two college programs have been able to make it to the Final Four in both the men's and the women's side. And both of those teams are North Carolina State and Connecticut. They don't match up against each other, however. So North Carolina State is expected to match up against Purdue, and there is a very anticipated matchup between DJ Burns and Zach Edey, and I feel like the game is ultimately going to be decided on which of those players outduels the other. And, like, I feel like that's where the biggest chances are. Like, that's ultimately going to decide the game, like, depending on who, like, outplays the other and by how much they outplay the other. But Zach Edey, he might get outplayed by DJ Burns in that battle. But the Purdue team, it seems to be good enough to be able to, like, score if Zach Edey isn't scoring. I mean, last game, Zach Edey, he dropped like 40 and 22 rebounds. Excuse me. So maybe he's going to, I don't expect him to have that exact same dominant performance coming into this game. I feel like DJ Burns can guard him rather well. But usually the defensive game plan when going up against Purdue is to double Zach and force him to pass the ball and force the other players to shoot. And my faith in Purdue is very, very low. So I don't know what it is. I don't see Purdue making it out of this round. I think North Carolina is going to pull off the upset and beat Purdue, simply because, like, Purdue, they have a lot to lose going into this matchup being the 1 seed. But North Carolina State being the 11th seed, they really have nothing to lose. And there's not as much pressure on them winning as there's pressure on Purdue winning. And I feel like that is the ultimate difference maker for this matchup. And I feel the players on Purdue, they are going to be more prone to collapse under the pressure than North Carolina's roster is, despite the seeding difference. So, next matchup, we have UConn going up against Alabama. And I've said this previously, and I'm going to say it again. UConn is arguably the most complete team going into this tournament, and they've shown that they've been the most complete team in this tournament. They've blown out practically every single opposing team in this tournament, and not a single game against UConn has been competitive. So with that in mind, I feel like this game is going to be a very, very high-scoring game because Alabama's defense is already not that good. And their main highlight is going to be on the offensive side of the ball where they're going to have to score. However, I think UConn's offense is just as good to be able to counter their offense, while at the same time their defense is just that much better. And I feel like Alabama is going to have to play a lot of catch-up going up against UConn in this series. Not this series, in this game, excuse me. I'm used to the NBA being a series, but I feel like Alabama, I think this game is going, I think both teams are going to score 100 points. Like, if UConn doesn't blow out Alabama, then both teams are going to score 100 points because Alabama's defense is kind of meh. Like, aside from the second round, Alabama's offense has been doing what it's been doing all season by taking tons of shots that end up going in and playing just enough defense to win. And it's that just enough part that it's not good enough when you're going up against UConn. And Nate Oates, the coach, that's what he's going to want this season. He's going to want the offense to outduel UConn, and I feel like that's a lot of pressure to be able to outduel a good defense while at the same time not having enough defense to stop their offense. And it's a difficult thing to do against this loaded UConn squad. And they've been playing both great defense and great offense. So if Alabama is able to find a rhythm that results in it having another scoring outburst, the issue is going to be playing that catch-up. And Alabama's defense falls apart against UConn's firepower most of the time, and it'll be an exciting game to watch. I fully expect, if it's not going to be a blowout, then it's going to be a very, very high-scoring game for college. There was only one game in the NCAA tournament this year that ended up seeing teams score 100 points, and that was Colorado going up against Florida early in the first round. And with that in mind, I see no surprises if, Alabama is able to score 100 and if UConn is able to score 100. Because if Alabama is able to score 100, then UConn is going to be able to fire back. So I think it's going to be back and forth between both of those guys. But with that, we are out of time for this second segment, so I'm going to go and pivot into the third segment where I talk about NBA basketball and as well as all the NBA games that went down from last night. And we'll talk a little bit about the Warriors because they matched up against the Rockets yesterday, and there's a little bit of drama going on around there. So I'm going to bring that up first, right after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube.